So it's time for our first if statement. We want to find out if after an attack we won. So here in the attack handler, we could add an if statement with the if keyword and check if the current monster health, after we deducted the damage from it, of course, if that is smaller or equal to 0. Because I also want to check for equality, because the monster is dead not only if its health is below 0, but also if it's equal to 0. If that is the case, then we know that we won. So in this case, we could throw an alert where we say, you won. So this code here will only execute if this condition here is met, and this condition is only met if the current monster health is below 0 or equal to 0. So with that, if we now reload this and we launch a couple of attacks against the monster, spam this button until the health bar is below 0, we get this 1. Now please note, this message is output before the health bar updates, simply due to the way JavaScript works here. It blocks the UI update until we dismiss this dialog here, but the general logic works, and if we dismiss it, we also see the health go down. So this works, and this is our first basic if check in action. Now of course, it's a bit boring if we can attack the monster, but the monster is not able to fight back. So what we actually want here is to adjust the logic to let the monster fight back. To do that, after we hit the monster should immediately lash back at us. So it should automatically hit us after we hit it. Now for that, in Vendor.js, we got the deal player damage function. It works basically like the deal monster damage function. It takes some damage, then calculates a random damage which is actually dealt, adjusts the player health bar in the UI, and returns the dealt damage. So in app.js, I can take advantage of this. For that, we just need to define what's the maximum damage of the monster. And here I'll add a constant monster attack value, again hard-coded into here, and I will let the monster hit me back with, let's say, a maximum damage of 14. So more than we can hit it for, which means that right now we will need a lot of luck in order to win, because these are maximum damages and the monster has an edge there. Of course, the game will evolve throughout this module and will also make the other buttons work, which will give us an edge again. So let's take that monster attack value here to let the monster deal some damage to us. And for this, I will get my monster damage, let's say, or player damage, depending on how you see it. It's the damage dealt to the players, so maybe player damage makes more sense. And for that, I will call deal player damage here, forward the monster attack value, and then reduce the current player health by that amount, again by simply deducting player damage with the minus equal operator. Now here, we want to check if the player won, so if the current monster health is smaller or equal than 0, or if the monster won. Now you might think that we simply add an else block, right? Because if we haven't won, if the monster health is not below 0, then we lost. But that would actually be wrong. Keep in mind that the attack handler is executed for every click on the button. So we run this check here for every button click. And on most clicks, especially when the game just started, neither party won. So we don't want to let the player lose in the else case, because if we do that, if we say you lost here, you will see that if we reload here, right after the first attack, we get the you lost message. Which makes sense because we run this check on every button click. Now, after the first attack, we certainly didn't win, so this condition is not met. Hence, we make it into the else block and we lost. So else is not right for this scenario. Instead, I want to check else if. So if we haven't won, if maybe the monster won. So here I'll check if the current player health is smaller or equal than 0. Now, of course, you could argue about this logic, because what I do at the moment is I let the player hit the monster, and then the monster immediately hits back, and only thereafter I check if the player won, which means the monster already dealt damage to us, and still, even if that damage took us below 0, we will have won if we also took the monster below 0, if we also reduced the monster's health below 0. Which means the monster's damage basically is irrelevant if we also took the monster's health below 0. And of course, you could argue about that. Maybe you instead want to check if the player won here after the player dealt damage, and therefore don't give the monster a chance of dealing damage to us if we won. Or you just don't care, you always execute both, and then you give the player the advantage of checking the monster health first, and therefore the player wins, even if the player's health also is below 0, because the monster's health is below 0 after this attack. So a lot of talking about how you look at this. From a technical perspective, it's way easier. We check if this condition is met, so if the monster health is below 0. If that is the case, we won. If that's not the case, we check if maybe the monster won, so if the current player's health is below 0. And if neither of the two is the case, then nothing happens in this if statement. Neither of these two code lines is executed, so neither the you won alert nor the you lost alert is shown, and instead we just finish the function execution and we're done. And that will be the case for most clicks, for most executions, especially at the start of the game. So with that, if we now save this and we reload, let's attack, and you see the monster is hitting us real hard here. We had a couple of weak hits, and therefore we're probably going to lose. So let's see what the end result is. And yeah, we get the you lost message here once our health dropped below 0. So the else if check is also working here. Now to fine tune this a bit more, we could of course say, yeah, we really want to tweak this, and we shouldn't be able to win if our health is also below 0. Instead, it should be a draw if both health values are below 0. So here we could say, we won if the monster health is smaller or equal than 0, and, now with the AND operator, the current player health actually is above 0, so greater than 0. Not greater or equal, because if it's equal we lost, but greater. So we can only win if the player's health, still is above 0. And the same for the monster. The monster only wins if the player's health, is below 0, and the monster health, on the other hand, is above 0. And that, of course, means that if both health values are below 0, it's a draw. So we could add else alert, you have a draw. But of course, that again would be wrong, because if we do that, keep in mind, attack handler executes for every click. So this else case will basically execute whenever neither of the two conditions is met, and that most of the time will be the case. So now again, we have the same case as before. On the first click, we get that you have a draw message. Because else, again, for this scenario, not always, but for this scenario is wrong. Instead, here I want to check else if the current player health is smaller than 0, smaller or equal than 0. And the current monster health also is smaller or equal than 0. Only in that case we have a draw. Now to simulate that, let's start with a max life of 5, where we have a realistic chance, or a more realistic chance, of actually launching an attack that takes us both below 0. And let's have a look at this. If I now click attack, yeah, right away I have a draw. You might have to test this a bit more often, because since the damage is calculated randomly, you can certainly have situations where you hit the monster for 2 and the monster hits you for 6 and therefore you lose. But after clicking this a couple of times, you should get that you have a draw message here. So with that, let me take it back to 100. With that, we now have logic that works correctly. Let's also check for a regular win or loss. Yeah, we lost here. And with that, we got our basic if statement with if, else if, and different logical operators, as well as the AND operator to also combine multiple conditions. So already quite a lot of the things you learned about in the past lectures are getting applied in this first crucial element of our game.